I'm here today with Ruth Hunt. Ruth, how are you?
Very well, Nick. How are you?
All right, thank you. We were just discussing the joys of technology, and here
Yep,
we are, two experts in a room together.
making it real.
Let me start. I suppose the place to start is we're in my view, one of those polarized times of forever. How do you? A big question, nothing small. How do you view where we are with the world?
I think that we are in a really interesting time of black and white, them and us, and limited ability to deal with nuance. And I think that what's unusual is that I encountered that first in 2017 around Gender Recognition Act and trans issues. And I think for the first couple of years, I thought this is about trans issues. This is all about trans issues. The polarization is about the intricate detail of how the Equality Act intersects with the Gender Recognition Act. And then I realized this has nothing very much to do with trans issues. There are some people who care, of
Yeah,
course, in the same way there were people who cared about whether gay people could stay in a B&B if it was run by a Christian, and whether civil registrars could marry. So there's always people who care, but not as much as it sounds.
yeah,
And what I realize now, so now it's 2023, I'm in the House of Lords, you could swap out trans for small boats, for Israel Palestine, for homelessness this week, these kind of issues that ask you, where do you stand? And what has really struck me in the way social media has responded to Israel Palestine and the terrible things that are happening in Gaza is that there is no space whatsoever to say, I'm not sure. I'd like to know a bit more. I think this is more complicated. So we have lost patience with the capacity to sort of say, this is a bit more complicated and can I think about it? And I'm not quite sure I know the answer, and I might have overstated that. So we're asked to be in a position, and I think that trans people have been the canary in the coal mine of that, and I was in there too, and
yeah.
I'm still in there too.
But therefore, do you think it's like we've lost the ability to discuss nuance, or is it the fact previously we were never interested, and therefore because we weren't exposed to it?
I don't know. I was reading about Newsnight this weekend, and someone was saying, the day of Newsnight is over. And so when we were younger, Nick, we would have our day, and then we'd watch Newsnight, right? And we would hear
Yeah.
about what had just happened in Parliament, and see politicians wanting to be held to account and wanting to be scrutinised. We now have a situation where you will hear about what's happened in Parliament 30 seconds after it's happened, and politicians will choose not to go on Newsnight. So the time of quick data, quick information doesn't lend itself for reflection, and doesn't lend itself to really creating that space where we're exploring. So politicians simply will not put themselves through something like Newsnight anymore. They'll go on GB News with their mate, or but they will not put themselves through Newsnight,
Mm,
or the Financial Times or something. So there's something about our capacity to take a bit of time, and our willingness to be scrutinized in that way, but also we think we know the answers, because the way in which we're receiving information means that we think we know the answers, and we take the first information we get. I talk in my work in Deeds and Words a lot about confirmation bias, where we seek the evidence to support what we think, like
yeah.
all the time. We kind of go, this is what I think about vaccines, and here's 20 bits of evidence to support me. And so we crave the certainty. I don't think we're very comfortable with uncertainty at the moment.
So can I kind of, for you, kind of in the House of Lords, not historically, kind of immersed in diversity and inequality and like areas which are absolutely kind of critical. But at the same time, you come to the realization this isn't just about a specific area. This is about how we view the whole world.
Yeah.
Have you changed your outlook about how you represent, how you debate, and are you Are you fighting a higher cause now, which is societal change across how we critically think?
Well, it's a really interesting question, Nick. I've just brought in a team at the Lords, because I simply wasn't able to keep on top of every little bit of stuff that was coming out about trans. Like it's like there was every week there was a question and there was a this and there was a that. And so I've got this team in place who are able to research and give me the data, and I'm able to brief other people. What we're doing is correcting misinformation. And that's never been my lobbying role. My
Mm.
lobbying role has been you think this and I think that, and let's find a middle ground. Now it's that editorial that you found on Wikipedia is not actually peer-reviewed research. And here is data. And so it's much more about that kind of data point. And I mean, I'm a crossbench, which means I'm not party political. But there's something about if the one thing that is unifying your party is punching down on trans people, then
Yeah.
trans people is not your problem, right? There is something different. There's a different problem there to think about what's going on for you and your party and your identity, if that's the thing that gets you the biggest cheer at a party conference. I think the dawning realization for me, I think a year ago I'd have gone, oh my God, I can't believe they're punching down on trans people. And now I'm like, why is that the only thing that's unifying the right? Like, why is that the only thing that is bringing this group of disparate people together? And there's almost a kind of riff you could do, which is like small boats, trans women on small boats, trans women taking places on small boats. You know, it's like, what are you saying? Like, it's a very odd way of building alliances.
But
It's
again, but then I still ask, but then I come back and ask you, okay, but that is where we are.
mm,
How do we take ourselves out of that cycle, of that political cycle? And actually, kind of, is it that actually someone like yourself has to rise above the fact that kind of the internet is rife with lies and rife with bad data and rife with everything? But if you're going down to that level, actually, you're missing where you should be discussing and debating, and which is taking us as a society to a better place.
absolutely. And I'm privileged that I'm in the House of Lords, right? So I actually have the power to change the way in which some of these discussions are being had,
Mm.
and the way in which we approach those conversations. And I think for me, I've got to a stage now where I say to my, and there's 800 other peers, right? I don't really mind which policy position they land on, as long as we are both reviewing the same data that is accurate and trustworthy. Whereas I think before I'd have said, I need to ensure that you get to this point. You
Right.
agree with me on this. Now I'm kind of okay about where you land, but let's not be lazy about it.
Yeah.
Let's not rely on shoddy information. So I guess my approach has changed, that I trust that the data will show it out. So it's
Right.
less about that subjective feeling, and a lot of identity politics has rested on subjective feeling. I feel, I want, I need. And actually, increasingly, we're talking much more about, well, how do you reduce health inequalities? And how do you ensure that people have good mental health? Because mental health costs the country X amount. So, how do we keep people well? How do we keep kids in school? How do we keep kids working? So, much more thinking in those terms rather than what do we want? Gay rights for gays, when are we going to get them tomorrow? It's a
Yeah.
very different kind of way of thinking that um, it kind of allows a much more adult way of conversation, but that has to happen behind closed doors. It's all corridors. It's all, you cannot do it on social media.
Yeah, I suppose that was my next question. If I now look at business, and if you're in front of a business audience, how do you get the C-suite of that business to overcome their fear of the fact they can't have, like, they can take a position which maybe is not the position that you necessarily would turn around to them and say, but the critical thing is the fact that they are discussing it in the right way and having that conversation. Are we grown up enough?
No.
Are we mature enough in order to allow them to do that? Fair enough.
Well, I hope so, Nick. I mean, I think what I'm seeing with some of the more progressive organisations
Mm.
that we work with is that they are really making the time to connect their effectiveness of an organisation with these issues. So rather than saying we need to do some diversity stuff, can you do a rent a gay speech for? Oh, that's my thumb. Can you do a rent a gay speech for me? Tell us your coming out story, whatever. They're doing much more about looking at their corporate risk register and seeing how these issues affect that. So I was working with a big supermarket And they were saying, do our diversity risk register. I was like, no, give me your corporate risk register. And item one on the corporate risk register is we do not have enough people to drive the lorries. And I was like, that's a diversity issue. You have got a fixed set of workforce who are the same demographic, who want to spend more time at home, don't want to spend so much time out on the road. Their pays and benefits are not working anymore. You need to think differently about how your trucks are driven and who is driving them and how that. And they were like, but don't we need to do a diversity day with you next week? I went, no, let's talk about trucks.
Yeah,
We work for a uniform service, and they were like, we can't get women trousers. I was like, we can make that a diversity issue, but that's about belonging, that's about pride, that's about identity, that's not the women's agenda over here.
yeah.
That's about how are you procuring your services. So much more people are understanding that this is key to their effectiveness, rather than an interesting spat that they've got to take a stance on. And that's the thing that's moving things for the better organizations I work with.
And therefore, do you feel positive? Are you feeling positive that actually we are moving in the right direction? I mean, especially from a business context, and the conversation has gone beyond that tick box.
Business, definitely. I mean, I think that the private sector in particular has always been ahead of the curve on this. So
Mm,
when I was working with the likes of IBM, etc., in 2004, I remember working with IBM in 2004, and they'd just set up their LGBT staff network, and they'd put business targets on their LGBT staff. I was like, what, you're not just going to have like a pride flag and a glass
yeah.
of sparkling wine? What are you doing? They were like, no, it's B2B. We expect our LGBT staff to be networking with the other LGBT staff, and there's some targets around that. And I was like, yeah, actually, like that's going to make that far more sustainable for IBM than going, oh my God, it must be so hard to be gay. Would you like some cake? Like there's a much more, and I think the private sector, those who've grasped that, those early adopters, some of those companies back in 2004-5 who are really getting it, are reaping the rewards now in terms of their profits and their profitability. Those who are still going, we better do a Muslim Day of Awareness, but then we'll forget Eid, aren't yielding that outcome to the same extent.
Ruth, thank you so much indeed. I've honestly thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's been enlightening. So appreciate your time, and catch up soon.
Thanks.